All right, so we're finally hopping into Cinema 4D, which is very exciting. If you are a bit experienced within the software, if you kind of know how things work or know how 3D works, maybe you can skip this part because this is mostly just for beginners to get a bit acquainted with the software before we actually do any of the real work. So if you skip this part and know the software already, you won't really miss anything. So this is the interface that we'll be working with. This is the standard layout, which it kind of just makes more sense for me to work in this layout, even though this might not be my preferred layout. It's just easier for newer people to kind of grasp the software if you don't have a bunch of things cluttering the workspace. But yeah, this is kind of how it looks like. We have our movement tools and our selection tools over here. This menu bar we'll discover later on, and this is kind of where you'll be creating your different shapes or deformers or geometry and lighting and that kind of stuff. So I think it's best for us to kind of discover each menu as we kind of learn what the pieces are that we'll be using, instead of just me hopping through each section of the software just to tell you what it is. I don't think you'll really grasp really what's going on unless we actually do some proper work by using a certain tool or whatever. So obviously this course won't cover every single menu of Cinema 4D. We'll just be using the actual tools that we need to make the work that we're doing. But I think you're gonna get a good grasp of the software just by working through this course. So in terms of like navigating in Cinema, this is the viewfinder, which is what you call it. You can navigate in this space by holding a few different buttons, and there are a few different ways of doing this. So I'm working with the mouse, which is a bit of a good knowledge to have, that working in 3D with the mouse is my preferred way of working. You can use a Wacom as well. I wouldn't recommend using like a trackpad or a laptop trackpad. That's not really the best way of working around, I think. So when working with the mouse in 3D, I like to hold in Alt and then move around with using the scroll click. I kind of pan around within the viewfinder. If I hold Alt and click the left mouse button, I kind of orbit around the viewfinder. And if I hold the right mouse button along with Alt, I zoom in and out. So you're basically holding Alt the entire time and then just shifting around these different mouse buttons. I think that's the best way of moving around. You don't have to do that. So some other ways of moving around is using these icons up here. So these three ones, so the hand, the arrows here, and then the orbiting mark here. So if you hold this is kind of like the manual way and the slow way of moving around in Cinema 4D. If you are on a Wacom tablet, for example, there's a really good way of holding 1, 2, 3, because then you probably, if you are using a Wacom, you don't have the right click, the left click, and the scroll click. So then it's actually just better to hold 1, 2, or 3, and then use your click. So if I hold 1 and click, I pan around. If I hold 2, I zoom in and out, and if I hold 3, I orbit around. So that's kind of how you can navigate around in these different ways within the viewfinder. Okay, so with some of the navigations out of the way, I think we actually can go ahead and create our first piece of geometry. This will just be to showcase how Cinema 4D works. This won't actually be part of the design that we'll be using. I'll just kind of use a cube as an example for us to work with and kind of discover how the software works. So we can come over here to our right menu bar here, and if you this little like arrow thingy here that you see, if this has this arrow thing, you can actually click and hold, and you get all of these different options. So for example, here you don't have that arrow, so if you click here, you're just going to create a null. I'll just go ahead and undo that. So I'll just click Control Z for that. But we'll create a cube. So if I'll just click here, I'll create a cube. So this is how a cube looks within Cinema 4D. And as you created that, you probably saw that we got our attributes window open here. So in here is basically where we're going to be making all of the changes for our different primitive objects. So we can change the width here, for example. We can change the size in Y. We can add fillets, like roundings of the cube and that kind of stuff. So this is where like all of our different objects that we create in Cinema 4D have their tools and their different attributes that you can change. So if you come over to, for example, this left-hand side of our menu and select the rotate tool, or R, you see that we get a bit of a different like handles system here. So this means that we can rotate the cube around. We also have the scale tool here. So if you hit T, you can scale this. And you also have the move tool here, which means that you can move it along these different axes, basically. Within 3D, since we are working with 3 dimensions, that's what the 3D space basically means. We have all of these different axes that we can work in. So if we hit this little toggle active view button here, we basically hop out to a 4-view workspace here. So now that we have a completely uniform cube with no differentiation between the sides, you won't really get too much from doing this. But if I were to, for example, scale the cube out in the Z here, you can kind of see that this is from the top view. So this is basically like viewing the cube from above. This front view here is basically viewing the cube from this angle. So if we want to make like changes in here, like in this window, so we can basically see how that affects our different viewfinders over here. So we'll be doing a bit of work in this workspace. But for now, we'll actually hop back into our perspective view. And I'll want to set this cube back to a 0 position and 0 rotation. So we have it straight and centered. So to do that, if we have our cube selected here, I can come down to our attributes window, and instead of having object selected, I can select coordinates. So here we can see that we basically can do the same kind of changes that we were making with our move tool and stuff. We can actually do those changes in this window as well. So that kind of depends on what type of work you're doing, basically. It's kind of good to know that all of these values here are correlating to the actual changes that are happening in our viewfinder. But for now, I'll just set all of these to 0, like that. And within the Cinema 4D workspace, we have this objects panel here, basically. So this is kind of just the list of objects that we create. So if we start to add, different things here, you can see that all of these things pop up within this workspace. I'll just go ahead and undo that so we remove them. If I, for example, want to create something that affects the cube, like a deformer, I would need to place it below the cube as a child of it. I'll just kind of show you what that means, because that's basically how the entire working structure of Cinema is based on. So if I, for example, come over here to the bend object and I press and hold, I'll get this twist deformer visible here. So I'll just release on that. And if I were to go to our twist deformer right now, go into object here and start doing things with it, nothing will actually affect the cube. So that is because we haven't placed our twist as a child of the cube yet. So if I take this twist deformer, I drag it and I drop it while this cube icon here is highlighted, it will actually be placed as a child for the cube. Not like this. This doesn't mean that it's a child. It's just being placed beneath the cube in the hierarchy. But if I actually drag it and release it while it's highlighted, that's when it's actually affecting the cube. So if I were to, for example, adjust the angle here of the twist, now it will actually start affecting the cube. And obviously, this is not what I expected the twist deformer to be doing. So the reason for that is because basically all geometry in 3D or in Cinema 4D is built on these different phases of geometry. And right now, this cube is actually just these 6 faces, basically. So the front, back, and then top, bottom, left, and right. So we don't have enough detail, basically, to twist this cube. And I'll just go ahead and come over here to our display tab here. So if I change this to Garage Shading Lines, for example, you'll see what I mean with this. So we don't have any like subdivided faces along the side of this cube to actually deform it. But if I were to come into our cube here and change the segments in X, for example, you'll see what this is starting to do with our actual cube. And I change the segments here on the Y, and then I also add some to the Z. Now we can actually see that we can twist this cube. And if you twist it a lot, you can obviously tell that this is getting very jagged and like the edges are like getting really hard. If I just go ahead and just add more details, we will start to smooth things out here. And I can add some fillets here to just get even more details. And then I can actually hop back to our garage shading here. So this is just kind of how the general principle of Cinema 4D works. And for example, so there's a thing called subdivision surfaces, where you basically smooth, you add even more details. So if I were to, for example, create one of those, will need to add the cube as a child to the subdivision surface for it to affect the cube. So I'm basically taking my cube and my twist and adding it as a child to the subdivision surface. So now you can even see that it's getting even smoother like this. So if I were to go ahead to our display tab here again and change it to Garage Shading Lines, you'll see that we have a lot of detail right now. So if I go ahead and deactivate this subdivision surface by hitting this green check mark here, you can see what this is doing. We're getting a lot more details by putting it within the subdivision surface. And with that done, I think we can actually go ahead and just show you what a 3D camera is, because we will be adding a camera to our actual scene later on. So I'll just change this display here back to garage shading. And if I go ahead and just come over here to our right-hand view again and create a camera, nothing really happens. But if we do move out from our original position here and zoom out, you'll see that we have created this little camera here. And this is kind of where you can kind of imagine this as a physical camera. Like this is the camera that we'll be placing out within our scene. We'll put it on a tripod and put it a bit further away from the surface. We'll change the lens of the camera to get a different like distortion of the subject. It basically works as a physical camera. It's just that it's put into a 3D space. So if I, for example, were to wanting to hop into this camera and move it around, I can come over here to this little square here, and if I hit that, it will go white, and you have this little dot within it. So if I were to move this around, and I say, oh yeah, I really like this angle, and I want to kind of lock that away and not bother it, then I can hop out of the camera. So that kind of position and that placement of this angle is untouched unless I actually go in and change it. But that means that you can kind of have this camera angle where you are basically going to do your rendering and animation in, but then you kind of hop in and out of it as you work maybe from a different angle. So for example, if I have this angle that I want to render from, but I want to do some work on the backside of the subject, for example, I don't have to like relocate the camera as I'm done editing. So this is just basically a way for us to put it on a tripod, like locking it away, so we don't have to reconfigure the composition every single time we want to do some editing. And in this camera, you can also do some really cool tricks like changing the focal length and the lens of the camera. So if I were to, for example, change this from a classic 36mm to like a super tele 300mm lens, which is like a super long like photographic lens, I'll obviously be insanely zoomed in. But if I go ahead and zoom out from this twisted cube here, you can see what massive change this does to the perception of it. It's almost kind of as if we're like flying around a building in like a bird's eye perspective, rather than like the regular lens that we had before. And you can even go the other way around by changing it to like a super wide lens, which will basically be like really wide angle camera lens. So if I were to, for example, stand on like street level and view this this building, I would probably want to use this kind of lens. But yeah, with that kind of shown, I can actually just go ahead and delete both of these things, because we actually won't be using any of them for the real design. So just go ahead and press both of them and just hit backspace or delete. So we'll have them deleted. And the only thing from this video is that we're going to create our plane, which is also a primitive. So if we come over here to our cube, press this, hold, we'll create this plane for us. And this will be the ground that we'll be putting our character on, basically. And we can go ahead and set the width and height to 500 centimeters each. Yes, we have some even numbers to work with. So with the interface and like the function of Cinema 4D kind of just briefly discussed, I think we can move into our first proper like modeling lesson. If you want to discover the software even more, I'll put some free resources below so you can watch them if you'd like. Other than that, I'll see you in the next lesson.